Welcome to the very first episode of Geek Money Life. So on this channel, we're going to be talking about money and how to make sense out of your dollars, all from the perspective of the geek. And so today's very first episode, we're going to be talking about probably the most popular debt elimination and wealth management system out there, and that's none other than Dave Ramsey's 7 Baby Steps. Now, I've actually gone through the system myself, and I could easily say it's definitely the easiest one to follow. And most importantly, I would say it's going to give most people the results that they want, considering that they actually follow these steps consistently over a long period of time. However, there is one problem with this system. And before I get into that, I just need you to kindly hit the like and subscribe button and subscribe for more video content like this. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into Dave Ramsey's 7 baby steps if you're not familiar with what they are. Starting with step number 1, where you're going to save $1,000 for the emergency starter fund. So this is kind of like a little backup before you start tackling your debt, which leads to step number 2, and it's probably the hardest one, and that's paying off all your debt except for your house using the debt snowball. And so once you paid off all your debt, you're going to move over to step number 3, where you're now going to have a fully funded emergency fund of 3 to 6 months of expenses. And once you have that, you're going to head over to step number 4, where you're now going to save 15% of your income for retirement. And once you've done that, you're going to go to step number 5, where you're going to have some money set aside for your children's college fund. And then step number 6, we're actually going to go ahead and pay off our house early. And then finally, on step number 7, you're going to build wealth and give. So as you can see, the 7 baby steps are really straightforward and easy to follow. However, that doesn't mean it's easy, especially when you're talking about baby step number 2, where you're paying off all your debt except for your household. Because for the majority of people, especially here in the United States, they're practically in debt their entire life. And so this is going to take a lot of work, long-term effort, and probably more stress than you've ever had, because you're constantly working on paying off your debt while at the same time taking care of everything else in your life. But that isn't where I have a problem with the 7 baby steps. The problem is actually with step number 1, where you have your $1,000 starter emergency fund. Now, even though $1,000 is not really going to be enough for most people, even though Dave Ramsey says that himself, I understand that it really helps people get started. But the reality is, once you start getting into step number 2, this is where that $1,000 starter emergency fund is simply not going to be enough, because whenever you're in step number 2, it's going to take you a while. And many things could happen in between that time, especially if you have a lot of debt. And so Dave Ramsey really likes to attack step number 2 with gazelle intensity. And the only problem with that is, if you're throwing any money you have at the debt, well, what happens if you actually lose your job, or you lose your source of income if you have a business, or whatever the case might be? Now you only have about $1,000 left in your starter emergency fund, and maybe if you did have some other money left, well, you probably set that aside for the debt itself if you're really going at it with this gazelle intensity. And so what I recommend you do here is, instead of having $1,000 on your starter emergency fund, I would highly recommend that you have 3 months of income in that starter emergency fund. So it's not simply just $1,000, but you really need to take a look at your monthly expenses and set aside 3 months for that. Now, this is going to be more difficult for some people than others, especially if you're not earning much income. But I would say if you have 3 months worth of expenses, it's really going to give you a great cushion, because if you get to step number 2 and then you have problems paying your debt for whatever reason, then more than likely you're going to have to get into more debt to pay for your living expenses. So let's say, for example, you're in step number 2, you're paying everything is going great, and all of a sudden you lose your job. So what do you do now? You don't have enough money to pay off this debt. But more importantly, now you don't have any money left over to actually pay for your living expenses. And so if you only had about a month in your starter fund, well, that could be gone in that very first month, or even in a few weeks. So now what you're going to have to do is, unfortunately, you're actually going to have to go into debt. You know, you're going to have to get credit cards, get loans, or whatever the case, So it actually defeats the purpose of really going at tackling your debt in step number 2 really hard, because now you've actually built up more debt. Whereas if you actually had 3 months worth of expenses saved up on your starter fund, well, 3 months does give most people enough time to find some other income. And even though it might not replace all your income, at least it will allow you to not have to go dig into even more debt while you're looking for some more income. And so those are my thoughts on the 7 baby steps, and most importantly, the one problem that I have. But other than that, I would say the 7 baby steps is going to be the best system out there for the majority of people. And if you did want to learn more about Dave Ramsey's 7 baby steps, I will leave links to his YouTube channel and also links to the website where he talks about the 7 baby steps. So that's it for the very first video. What are your thoughts on Dave Ramsey's 7 baby steps? Or what are some other systems that you use to actually tackle debt and build wealth? So leave that in the comments area below. And if you had any other thoughts on this video or this channel, be sure to leave that in the comments area as well. And I will see you on another episode of Geek Money Life.